Welcome, everyone. As we learn Torah, Be'ezras Hashem Yisbarach, and we first thank TorahAnytime.com for granting us the global platform for teaching Torah. You know, the power of Torah Anytime is just amazing. I was looking at my dashboard, and I made a 13-minute burst of inspiration for TorahAnytime.com, and I saw there were over 1,400, almost 1,500 people that watched it. It's just, it's amazing the power of. I gave a little speech in shul before Eicha, and almost 600 people watched that. I mean, the power of Torah Anytime all over the country is staggering. And at the same time, we want to thank Chalaloshin for its global network, and YouTube, Facebook, and our Zoomers, our subscribers, our Oilam and Agudas Shal Zev of Lakewood, and Torah Communications Network. Tonight we have a very special sponsor. Our Shiur is sponsored by Dr. and Mrs. Sana Block for Dr. Block's father's yahrzeit, which is Tez Zayin Menachem Av. And we learn for Aaron ben Eliezer. His neshama should have an aliyah. He should be a Melz Yosher for his family, for all of us, and all of Klal Yisrael. This week's parsha is so full, so jammed. I mean, it has the Aseret HaDibros, it has Moshe Rabbeinu's incredible 515 prayer petition to the Rabbeinu Shalom, but it also has Shema Yisrael. And you know, in today's times, what Rashi tells us in Parshas Shoftim, that the Skan, the Kohen that was Meshuach Milchama, that was anointed for battle, told them, Afilu ein bachem zchus, ela kriya shema bilvad. Even if you only have the merit of Kriya Shema, Kedayat Atem, Sheyoshia Eschem, you're worthy to be saved. How important that we should brush up on Kriya Shema during these dangerous times. Reb Yehuda Leib Chasman asks such a basic question about Shema Yisrael. We know that we say the Parsha Rishayna first, and then the Parsha Shniya, the first Parsha of Kriya Shema first, and then the second Parsha, because the first Parsha is Kabbalas Ol Malchus Shemayim, is accepting the yoke of heaven, and the second Parsha is then accepting the mitzvahs. First you have to accept the commander, and then you could accept his commandments. Ask Reb Yehuda Leib Chasman in the Or Yoel, if you want to look this up, it's in Chele Gimel, Shin Nun Tes. It's so basic. Reb Yehuda Leib Chasman says, if Shema is an affirmation of our accepting the yoke of heaven, so shouldn't we say, Ani mamin be'emunah shalema that Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad? Wouldn't that be the way to word it? Ani mamin Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad? Now, before I get to what the fundamental lesson of Rav Chasman, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niyeh b'dvaro. I want to tell you an amazing medrash that I found. It's a medrash in our parsha. And it addresses this preface of Shema Yisrael. Really, Shema Yisrael is strange. What do you mean Shema Yisrael? Ani mamin. I'm making Kabbalah so much Shema. Ani mamin she'Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. What's Shema Yisrael? So listen to the lashon of the medrash. Amar Rab Pinchas HaKohen ben Chama. Rab Pinchas HaKohen, the son of Chama, said, Mimatan Torah Zochi Yisrael L'Kriya Shema. From Har Sinai, Klal Yisrael merited Kriya Shema. And he explains, Ketzad, what does that mean? So he says, Like Pasach HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Sinai, when Hashem started talking to us at Sinai, he started Ela B'Dav Hazeh. Amar Lahem, he said to Klal Yisrael, Shema Yisrael, listen Yisrael. He's addressing 600,000 men from 20 to 60, 3 million people. Shema Yisrael, Anoichi Hashem Elokecha. The first of the commandments. Listen Yisrael, I am Hashem your God. And Nenu Kulam, we answered Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Hashem our God, Hashem is one. And Moshe then said, Baruch Shem K'vod Malchusay L'olam Va'ed. So it turns out that according to this medrash, Shema Yisrael was the opening words of Hashem. He said Shema Yisrael, he said Anoichi Hashem Elokecha, and we paraphrased it, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And therefore we put it together that Hashem said Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. It's a very interesting way of understanding Shema Yisrael. Then I found, we all heard of the great Maharal Prague, the one that made the Golem, all the deep works of thought by the Maharal. The Maharal had an older brother, and his older brother wrote a sefer called Sefer HaChaim. The Sefer HaChaim of the Maharal Prague. And in the Sefer HaChaim he says that it's the minig of Klal Yisrael that in times of danger they cry out Shema Yisrael. This has been throughout the ages. When Klal Yisrael was in the most urgent of distress, people said Shema Yisrael, whether they were waiting the gas chambers, whether they were facing the Inquisition, whether they were facing pogroms, they said Shema Yisrael. As a matter of fact, in one of the films on Tisha B'Av, I heard that there was a family in Kfar Aza that was so non-dati that they refused to put a mezuzah on their door. And the mother was so upset that she refused to visit them in their house because they didn't put on a mezuzah. She passed away without seeing the home because they were so steadfast of not putting on a mezuzah. Yet that day of October 7th, when they were cowering behind the door and they were shooting at the door, they said Shema Yisrael. Like they say, there's no atheists in the foxhole. Shema Yisrael is what, so the Maharal's older brother says that what's the meaning of Shema Yisrael? So he says, one of the names of Hashem is Yisrael. That's one of the meanings of Bnei Yisrael, with the children of God. One of the names of Hashem is Yisrael. So when we say Shema Yisrael, we're also saying, Hear Hashem, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, we believe. Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. That's the Maharal Prague's older brothers, the Sefer HaChaim's interpretation of this. However, now I'm going to come to the extraordinarily fundamental pshat of Rabbi Yehuda Leib Chasman in the Or Yoel. It's extraordinarily fundamental. He says that if a person is mekabel ol malchus shamayim and accepts the yoke of heaven, that he has a boss, he doesn't fully fulfill the directive of Shema Yisrael. He says the directive of Shema Yisrael is that we should have a hanhogas achayim. We should have a way of life that everybody should see upon us that Hashem is our God and that Hashem is one. And that's the declaration of Shema Yisrael. Shema Yisrael means that I'm saying that I'm going to lead my life in a way that Klal Yisrael will hear from me that I'm living under the directive of Hashem. And Rabbi Chasman says that fits in perfectly, because what do we say right after Shema Yisrael? I'm not talking about Bar Shem, that's an insertion in the Torah. What comes right after Shema Yisrael? V'ahavta es Hashem elikecha. You should love Hashem. And of course the question is, how do you love Hashem? You're going to give him a hug? How do you love Hashem? So the Gemara in Yuma tells us, what does it mean, V'ahavta es Hashem elikecha? It's the Gemara in Yuma daf pei vav. Shetehei shem shamayim misahev al yodecha. That the name of heaven should be loved through you. When people see the way that you behave, when people see your sensitivity, when people see your kindness, when people see that you're slow to anger, when people see that you're loyal to your spouse, when people see that you're charitable, when people see that you tell the truth, when people see that you have a clean mouth, when people see that you don't talk badly about others, when people see that you don't act in a gluttonous manner, so they see through you, they see Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. That's the Shema Yisrael. It's more than just you living with the realization of having a boss. It means that you're living in a way where Shema Yisrael, where Yisrael hears, where it's noticeable. This man is a man of God. This man is living with higher ideals. And it's interesting, because if you look in Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Samach Aleph Sif Daled, it says, Noyig in Likrais Pasik Rishon Bekel Ram. The minhag is to say the first pasuk in a loud voice. And then the Shulchan Aruch continues, Kedei la'orer ha'kavana, in order to stir the kavana. This is why we cover our eyes. It's brought down, we cover our eyes. Because if we cover our eyes, we're not distracted. It's easier to have kavana. It's so important to have kavana in this pasuk, that Hashem Elokeinu, that Hashem is our God. Takif balach yichelis kulay. Hashem echad. Hashem is one. Right? We say the Aleph stands for one and only. The Ches stands for the 7 heavens and 1 earth. That's 8. and the Dalet stands for the four directions. Rabbi Shal Salanta says, when you're busy pointing Hashem on the seven heavens and one earth and the four directions, don't forget to appoint him over yourself. We say Hashem Elokeinu. Now, Hashem is just Elokeinu, is just our God. But there will come a time when Hashem Echad, where Hashem will be one for everyone. Right? So when we say this, we're not just saying it for ourselves. We're saying it out loud. So I want to add, not just like the Torah says, L'Orah Kavana, but also because, as the Or Yoel says, that's the edition of Shema Yisrael. Because we want to advertise this to everyone, that this is our way. Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hashem is our God, and Hashem is one. He's the only real entity. Nothing else exists independent of him. And therefore, our life revolves around doing his way. It's interesting. This is fascinating. I found this a piece of history, but also something that's pertinent every Shabbos and Yom Tov. You know, by Musaf, we add, whether you're Ashkenaz and you say Naritzcha, or you're Sfard and you say Keser, we add to Kedusha Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and all the way at the end we say Ani Hashem Elokeichem, right? So that's the beginning and the end of Kriya Shema. Why do we do that? So it's interesting. The Shibalei Aleket brings down from the Tshuvas HaGa'onim. Tshuvas HaGa'onim tells us that in the time of Rav Nachman, there was a Persian king by the name of Yugzarad. Actually, it's brought down in the Oitzer HaPlois that there were three, a lot of times there are generic names. Like Pharaoh was a generic name, right? Or Antiochus was a generic name. And there were different Queen Elizabeths, right? They're generic names. So actually, this was Yugzarad II. Yugzarad I was benevolent to the Jews. But there was a Persian king, Yugzarad II, who decreed to be mavatal the saying of Kriya Shema, that we weren't allowed to say Kriya Shema. He understood that Kriya Shema is like the backbone, acceptance of yoke of heaven. So he decreed that we couldn't say Kriya Shema. So at the time, the rabbis enacted that Kriya Shema should be slipped into all the Kedushas, not just by Musaf, and not just on Shabbos and Yom Tov, but rather all the Kedushas during the week too. We should slip in Shema Yisrael, and it's brought down Baruch Shem. What happened is the Rabbanim of the time, obviously we're talking about the time of Rav Nachman, so these were great rabbis. They were mispalel to be Mavatal Gzeira, and it says, at noon, a huge snake entered the palace of Yugzarad and swallowed him alive. A sanin came, some type of a lizard, a huge lizard came and swallowed Yugzarat. And the decree was canceled. So then they thought to say, don't say it in Kedusha. But then the Tshuvas HaGa'onim says, the rabbis at the time said, let's leave it in Musaf on Shabbos and Yom Tov when there's a large crowd, and the Ne'ilah as Presumei Nisa of the miracle that happened. Isn't that fascinating? That every week now, Shabbos Nachama was a big week. It's a big week in shuls. Shuls will be packed. Right? So we say, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. It's Pesumei Nisa. It remembers of the miracle that a sun and a snake came and swallowed the Persian king because he tried to cancel Shema Yisrael. Just by the way, the Levush also brings down this whole story. By the way, here we have to add a very important halakhic caveat. There are a lot of people that go to daven Musaf for the Amud, and when it's their turn to start, so they start singing Mimkoimai Hu Yifen Baracham of Liyamai, and they don't say over the Shema Yisrael. Now that's wrong for two reasons. First of all, it's wrong because it's the Chazin's job to be aware that if somebody is davening a slower Shemoneh Esrei, and he didn't finish yet, the way he's Yaitzi Kedusha is because he listens to the Chazan, and he's Yaitzi with Shemea Ka'ina. When he listens as if he said it. And if the Chazan doesn't say again, Kadosh, 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 and Baruch Kvaid, and Shema Yisrael, he's not being Maitzi, the poor fellow who's still davening Shemoneh Esrei. That's number one. That's basic halacha aleph beis. But number two, we said that the whole purpose of saying Shema Yisrael is Presumei Nisa, to broadcast this great miracle. And what's the Presumei Nisa? When the Chazan says it. When you say it by your seat, that's not the Presumei Nisa. The Presumei Nisa is when the Chazan belts it out for everybody. Now, we end off Hashem Echad, and we say Echad with a big Dalet. There's two letters that are large in the pasuk of Shema Yisrael, the ayin of Shema, and the Dalet of Echad. Now, the simple reason why they're big is because, God forbid, you shouldn't think it's an aleph. Because if it's an aleph, then it would be read Shema Yisrael, maybe Yisrael. No, it's not maybe. It's Shema. It's listen. And don't think that it's a Reish. Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Acher. No, it's not Hashem is someone else. It's Hashem Echad. But the Arizal says an interesting thing over here. The Arizal says that the Dalid of Echad is large because it represents the Dalid Imohos, our four matriarchs, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. That's why it's a big Dalid. Now that's a little bit strange. What does Hashem Echad have to do with the four matriarchs? It's almost like I said, it's the four cases. What does it have to do with the four matriarchs? The Arizal doesn't explain, but I have a strong feeling it's because Hashem Echad, which is the declaration of Emunah, is a special power of women. Women were always strong in Emunah Pshuta. In the hardest of times, women had an easier time of keeping up their belief. All the way back in the days of Mitzrayim, when it says, B'schus nashim tzidkani yoish ba'is adar nigalu. All the way back in the Midbar, when the women didn't participate in the Egel Azav. They wouldn't give their jewelry. They wanted to go into the land. Women, and this comes from our four matriarchs, from the DNA, from the Ma'aseh Imois, Simon Labanais. And by the way, there is a correlated, Rabbeinu Ephraim is one of the Rishonim. Pasuk says, Eretz Asher Avoneha Barzel, which literally means a land where we mine from its rocks iron. But Avoneha is its building blocks. And Barzel, says Rabbeinu Ephraim, stands for the four wives of Yaakov. Bilhah, Rachel, Zilpah, and Leah. Because that's where the Bnei Yisrael, the Imois, were Barzel. They were iron. Their Amunah was strong. That's the Barzel. Bilhah, Rachel, Zilpah, and Leah. Now there's a very interesting and controversial. We've quoted in the past the great ancient sefer that the Mishnah Berurah brings down in awe, the Sefer HaKanah. The Sefer HaKanah writes that Kriya Shema is to be said standing in Eretz Yisrael and sitting in Chutz La'aretz. And he explains, because it's not the same way talking in the palace of the king than outside the palace. In Eretz Yisrael, you're in the palace. So there you should say Kriya Shema standing. Of course, that's not the meaning nowadays. Already at the time of the great Reb Chaim Palaji, he says this Sefer HaKanah, although everybody respects the Sefer HaKanah, he says this is not muskam, and that even in Eretz Yisrael it's said sitting. And the same thing in the widely accepted siddur of Rav Amram Gaon. He says, look, the bottom line is that Kaimel on halacha k'beis Hillel. The law is like Beis Hillel. You could say Kriya Shema in any way, standing, sitting, leaning, right? Yet, in the Likutei Chavar Ben Chaim, it brings down that the minig of the Chassam Sofer was to stand by Kriya Shema in the morning and in the night. And they bring down that even when he was very weak, and he sat all the way through Baruch Shamar, Asher Yotzer, all the way till Shemona Esrei, he still stood by Kriya Shema, which is very interesting. Why? It's a very unique behavior. So it's interesting that in the footnote of the Eitzer HaPlois, he brings down from the Rebbe, the Admor, Rabbi Yochanan Me'erloi, my new Shver, Avigdor Aryeh ben Rivki, should be gesund. Rabbi Aryeh Danziger, he learned when he was young in Erloi. His brother was a Rebbe in Erloi. The great Admor, Rabbi Yochanan Me'erloi, Zecher Tzadik L'Vracha, Zchusa Yagan Aleinu, suggests that the reason why the Chassam Sofer stood by Kriya Shema is because we know Friday night when we say Vayechulu, we stand. And everybody, even those people like me, who sit by the second part of Kiddush, that was Rav Moshe's minig, because the Kiddush b'makom Suda, we stand by the first part. Why? Because we're giving Eidos. It's Eidos on Brias Ha'olam, and Eidos has to be done while standing. It's testimony. That's why some people do tshuva before saying Kiddush. Because the minig is that Eidim do tshuva, because al toshes Rasha liyos Eid. A Rasha can't be an Eid. So many people, before they say Kiddush Friday night, they do tshuva. So Rabbi Yochanan Eloi says the same thing. It says Kriya Shema is Eidus. That's why he says the ayin of Shema and the dalet of Echad is large, because it spells Eid. We're giving testimony. And that's why it says if a person says Kriya Shema without tefillin, he is Kameyed Eidus Shakar Ba'atzmai. It's as if he testifies falsely. Because it says Ukshatam La'is al Yodecha Vayula Taitavais Beineinecha, and he's not wearing tefillin. That's why later on Tisha B'Av, when we put on tefillin, many people have the minhag to say Kriya Shema when they put on the tefillin by mincha. So therefore, since it's Eidus, he suggests that's why the Chassam Sofer did it while standing. And it's also brought down in the Sefer Minig Toig that the minig would be, of course, the minig of the Welt now is not to stand, and to stand while everybody is sitting would probably be either Mirze Kiyura, it would look like arrogance, or it would be a punishment at Sibur. So I don't recommend it, unless you're a Talmud Muvik of the Chassam Sofer. Now, moving right along in this truly incredible parsha, V'odata levanecha ulevnei vanecha, you should inform your children and your grandchildren, Yoim asher amadta lifnei Hashem alikecha b'chayrev, the day that you stood before Hashem at Chayrev. Chayrev, of course, is Har Sinai. So there's this remarkable Yerushalmi in Shabbos, Vav Amid Beis, that's a must-read for all Zaydas, for all Sabbas, for all grandpas. And I'll tell you the truth, I'm listening to it with both ears the same way as you are. And I have to tell you that I certainly do not live up to this, but I'm listening and learning as I hope all of you are. It's really a remarkable Yerushalmi. You know, one of the great people in the Gemara was the great Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. So the Gemara tells us that every Friday, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi haya boichein es nichtoi kol erev Shabbos. Every Friday, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi would test his grandson on what he learned that week in Cheder. Pamachas, one time, shokach. He forgot to go to his grandson. And he already went into one of the bathhouses in Tveria to bathe. He was escorted and leaning on the shoulders of Yehoilech al Kseifav shel Reb Chia ba'ab. Now there is a machlokes in the Gemara in the Yerushalmi whether he actually just went into the bathhouse or he already got undressed. There's one opinion that he already got undressed. And he remembered that he forgot to farher his grandson. So he got redressed, traveled from Tveria back to his grandson without going into the bathhouse in order to farher his grandson. So Reb Chia bar Abba, you know, Torah he v'lil moed ani tzarech, it's Torah I want to learn. Reb Chia bar Abba said that we learned that you're not allowed to go into the bathhouse before you daven mincha. But if you already started, you don't have to stop. He said that's surely the case for Torah. So how come the Rebbe, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, you already got undressed and you didn't go into the bathhouse, but you redressed and went straight to your grandson? So you listen to it, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi answered him. Kala hi beinecha? Is it light in your eyes? Mitzvahs halimid imaneched? the mitzvah of learning with a grandchild? Whoever hears Torah from his grandson, it's as if he's getting it directly from Har Sinai. Inform your children, your grandchildren. The linkage is that when you learn with your grandson, it's as if you're standing at Sinai. This is incredible stuff. You know, if I tell you you have a chance to hear from a great Gadol Torah, tell you that Reb Shmuel Kamenetsky is coming in, he's going to be next door, you're going to run over, you could hear something from a great Gadol in his 90s. Says Rabbi Shimon Levi, when I hear Torah, it's interesting, not just if I teach my grandson, but if I hear Torah from my grandson, is as if I'm hearing from Hashem at Sinai. And Rabbi Shimon Levi said this takes precedence. People don't realize, they say over that when the Chavetz Chaim started teaching his grandson Aleph Beis, he made a special l'chaim. Tufki Abiyu brings this down. Made a special l'chaim. It's a remarkable opportunity to learn with a grandson. It's not just, you'll say, look, you know, I got my own learning. You know, I could learn a little Chumash with my grandson, you know, but I got Daf Yomi and I got other learning that I have to do. But is it like hearing it from Har Sinai? Kalahi beinecha? I've pointed this out to you many times, that the Chasam Sofer said, it says in the pasuk, Vayisircha Hashem b'fri vitnecha. Hashem will give you extra because of the fruit of your womb. And the Chasam Sofer explains that if we're needed by the next generations, if we're needed, then that's a reason that Hashem should give us more even than our kates, even than our fixed time, because we need it. Rabbi say, we're living in such changing times. My wife was telling me that they're having panels now on children off the derech to all mainstream schools. We're living in such a spiritually hostile environment that has such a toxicity to the youth. And they need to smell the fragrance of a much more wholesome world that we lived in. They don't live in such a wholesome world anymore. It's a very big thing. And when we do that, it's as if we're connecting back with Sinai. Oh, I'm talking about this. I just want to mention that Reb Chaim Pelagi, nowadays you go to a bar mitzvah, and the bar mitzvah boy gets up to speak, and they sing, and they interrupt him, and they cancel it. It's become a very accepted thing. Reb Chaim Pelagi wrote very strongly that this is not a good practice. Now, the purpose of it is for a good reason, and that is because of the bar mitzvah boys that don't know how to talk. And perhaps, if we're clued in that that's the situation, then it's appropriate. But in general, Reb Chaim Pelaji said that the Bar Mitzvah Pshetel is a big inyan of Kavod HaTorah. You should know that the Yamshel Shloimeh says that if it's not Boi Bayom, if it's not the day of the Bar Mitzvah, it's not a Sudas Mitzvah unless there's a Bar Mitzvah Pshetel. And the truth of the matter is, with today's Bar Mitzvah, which become more and more sans the mitzvah, more the bar, and we're talking about in some places it becomes totally iker chaser min hasefer, missing the whole point. The Reb Chaim, in his Orchos Yosher, said that he didn't let them stop his Einikov from saying his Bar Mitzvah Pshet. I even heard the Tufchi Abiyu writes from one of the great Bali Musar that his grandchild was saying the Pshetel, and they kept on interrupting, and he kept on telling him to continue. They kept on interrupting, and he kept on telling him to continue. And afterwards he explained that everybody thinks that the reason is not to embarrass a Bar Mitzvah boy. He said that's not the reason. The reason of the interrupting is to let the Bar Mitzvah boy know from a young age that when you learn Torah, there's going to be a lot of interruptions. That's the way life is, because the Yetzer Hara interrupts with Torah and distracts with Torah more than anything else, because Barasi Yetzer Hara, Barasi Torah Tavnula. And therefore you should persist. You should prevail and go to the end. That's what he says. It's always interesting. We think minhagim are for one reason, and they're really, it's like the famous word from Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, that he says that by a fast, by a yortzeit, we make a Hasidah make a tikkun. So he says people think that it's a party. He says the truth of the matter is that a person that on a yortzeit fasted. Ki yom shemeis by rabbi, ki yom shemeis by aviv. He said, but what did they do? They made a siyum. So if they made a siyum, they didn't have to fast. So that was the tikkun. He says nowadays there's no fasting and there's no siyum. There's just the schnapps and the cake. So here too, this big Baal Musa said the purpose of interrupting the Bar Mitzvah boy is not that he shouldn't be embarrassed. He says it's to let the Bar Mitzvah boy know that when you're learning, there's going to be in life a lot of interruptions. But you should persist and prevail. Now, I guess when I'm talking about this, I should say that the custom of making a Bar Mitzvah Pshetel, which the boy says in a monotone, and nobody understands it, is not a good custom. Now, I understand that we want to show the Bar Mitzvah boy that he could understand a complicated Shagas Aryeh. But if he's going to say it to a public and nobody is going to understand it, it's introducing him right away that you could talk, nobody listens anyway. It's not a good thing. It's much better, and I did this with my children, it's much better to teach them something which they can explain, even if it's a simple thought. And it's much better to give them that they should talk Karsatoiv to their parents and to talk about their grandparents. Everybody is listening. It's something that they will remember, and it's something that they could build upon later. The practice of a Bar Mitzvah Pshetel, where everybody either just spaces out, or there's a buzz in the crowd with nobody listening, especially not the women, That's a very bad practice. And that's probably why people just sing and say, forget about it. Nobody's going to listen anyway. Let's just sing it and get it over with. Vatem, now I want you to fasten your seatbelts, Rabbi Isai. There's not much time left. But I want you to fasten your seatbelts because I'm going to share with you some hair-raising stuff right now. Vatem adveikim b'Hashem Elokeichem, you who cleave to Hashem your God, chayim kulchem hayom. You're all alive today. Of course, the simple meaning of this is very important. The Gemara says there is a pasuk that all of Torah depends on. And that's the pasuk, B'chol drachecha do'ehu. In all your ways you should know Him. That means in whatever we're doing, we should be thinking about Hashem. You're playing ball? I got to be honest in my calls, right? I shouldn't say something not nice if my partner misses the ball. I should be sensitive. Whatever you're doing, you're at home, you have a mitzvah v'simach es ishtai, you have a mitzvah v'afta l'reach kamaycha. Whatever we're doing, we're passing the mezuzah, whatever. In all your ways, acknowledge Him. That's vatem adveikim b'Hashem Elokeichem. You should cleave to Hashem, your God. Chayim kulchem hayom. That's life. I told you that was Rav Moshe's minig, that when he put on the tefillin, in order to limit the hefsek between the tefillin shel yad and the tefillin shel rosh, he didn't do all 7 wrappings right away. He did only like 3 wrappings, then put on the tefillin shel rosh, and then did the 7. Now, since he could talk then, because he already put on the tefillin shel rosh, when he did the 7 wrappings, he did poiseach es yodecha umazbia lechol chai ratzon, which has 7 words. Now, I heard from Rav Shmuel David Friedman from different Gedolei Yisrael that they had different minhagim. So some said the pasuk of Atem hadveikim b'Hashem Elokeichem chayim kulchem hayom, because that also has 7 words. I heard from the famous Rav Itzkel, that his custom was to say veheve don es kol ha'adam lekaf schus. Also has 7 words. But this pasuk of Atem adveikim b'Hashem Elokeichem chayim kulchem hayom. So of course the question is, this is based on the pasuk of a voice sidbak. You should cleave to Hashem. So the Gemara says, how could you cleave to Hashem? Haloi eish oichlahu. He's a consuming fire. So the Gemara says, be medabek b'talmidei chacham. Be medabek with tzaddikim. Because it says, es Hashem Elokecha tira, l'rabbis talmidei chacham, to include talmidei chacham. So in order to be davik in Hashem, you should be davik with talmidei chacham. So now let me tell you a story that's in the famous Shema Gedolim by the Chidah. In the Shema Gedolim, Shema Gedolim tells that during the terrible atrocities, terrible atrocities of Tach V'Tat, the Chmielnicki atrocities, which Rabbi Wein says so aptly, that if it wouldn't be for the Holocaust, this would have been the most tragic time in the history of Klal Yisrael. So during that time, during that time, a man went to sleep, and in the night, the Alshich came over to him. And the Alshich HaKadosh told him, I was given permission to tell you that tomorrow your whole town is going to be murdered by the Cossacks, and that you should leave immediately with your wife and your family. If you stay till the morning, you'll all be killed. He said, I was given permission to come to you because you always learn my Sefer, the Alshich, and you teach it to others. In that schus, I was given permission to come and to tell it to you. This is literally, says the Chidah, Va'atem adveikim b'Hashem Elokeichem, because he was a davak. He was davak in the Alshich, Kayim kulchem hayoim. His family's lives were saved. They packed out in the middle of the night. When I learned this Shem Agdolim, I think to myself, Hashem, throughout my career of teaching Torah, it should go till the Mashiach, I always said over from the Per Aaron, from the Dvar Aaron. I always taught from the Paneach Rosa. These are svarim that I always used. It should be a protection for us. But that's one of the meanings of Atem Adveikim B'Hashem Elokeichem. But now, I told you I want you to fasten your seatbelts. I want you to fasten your seatbelts. This story is a Messiah, a tradition that was handed down from the family all the way from the time of Rav Shri Gaon, almost 1,000 years ago. There was a Yid who passed away. He was a very wealthy man. He had several sons. And in his possession was probably what could be, today would be the holiest artifact in the world. He had in his possession the Sefer of Ezra. That was the Sefer Torah that was kept in the Beis HaMikdash. He had in his possession the Sefer of Ezra. So as the story goes, one of the sons, it doesn't say he was the oldest son, one of the sons said that he's willing to give up the whole Yerusha to get the Sefer Torah. It seems to be that this was a family of righteous people. He wasn't the only one that felt that way. But he made the declaration. At the end, they decided to do a geirel, a lottery, and he got the Sefer Torah. There was a very evil man who, when he heard that there was a man that forfeited a life of immense wealth for a Torah, he thought he was crazy. And he wanted to get him. In the middle of the night, mamash evil. In the middle of the night, he crept into the Beis Medrash, opened the Aron Kodesh, took out that Sefer Torah where it says "Va'avartem es Hashem Elokeichem" with an ayin, uvarech es lachmecha, and he'll bless your bread. Verech es lachmecha, v'esmeimecha. He changed the ayin to an aleph. And he gloated, now he's not going to have anything. He's not going to have money, and he's not going to have a kosher Sefer Torah. Anyway, they got up to the Torah, and they read it, and to their horror, they saw in the Sefer Ezra, it was with an aleph. And the rabbi and the owner was, how could that be the Sefer Ezra? How could it be? So that night, the father came to him in a dream, and told him it's a kosher Sefer Torah. An evil man came in and changed the ayin to an aleph. This man already got his punishment, ayin tachas ayin. He changed the ayin, he became blind. Ayin tachas ayin, eye for an eye. As to the Sefer Torah, don't touch it. It was decided that Ezra himself will come down and fix it. The next day they checked the Sefer Torah and they found it with an ayin. And there was a man in the town that suddenly became blind in both eyes. So the shaila obviously is, which Rav Zilberstein asks, it's a big shaila. And that is, how could Ezra change it? You could only write a Sefer Torah if you're chayiv mitzvahs. Meisim chavshim min mitzvahs. The dead are free from mitzvahs. It's a very big kasha. So there's a Reb Kiva Eger. Reb Kiva Eger brings down that the Gemara tells us that Reb Yehuda Nasi, after he passed away, he came home Friday night and he made Kiddush for his family. Shaila is, how could he make Kiddush for his family? Meisim kavshim min mitzvahs. The dead are free from mitzvahs. So the Sefer Chasidim says that tzaddikim afilu b'misasan kruyim chayim. The righteous, even in their death, are considered alive. And that's the meaning of atem adveikim b'Hashem Elokeichem. If you're so attached to Hashem, chayim kulchem hayom. And Reb Kiva Eger says that we have another Gemara. It says that Reb Eliezer, Reb Shimon, he wasn't buried right away. He was left in his attic many years. And the Gemara says when there was a machlokes, the two litigants came to the house, and there was a voice from the attic, this one's zakai and this one's chayiv. This one's innocent, this one's guilty. Torah loy b'shamayim hi. Torah is not in heaven. The answer is tzaddikim, even in their death, are considered alive. Atem adveikim b'Hashem Elokeichem chayim kulchem hayom. By the way, we're used to the term mitzvos. Now, mitzvahs is spelled several times in the Torah with two vavs. Now, if you ask 10 out of 10 people, they'll tell you that why is it called mitzvahs? Mitzvahs is commandments. Right from the lashon of tziva, asher kitshanu mitzvahisa b'tzivanu. They're the commandments that we get from God. I'm commanded. I don't have the luxury not to do it. I'm commanded. I have a boss. Right? I'm commanded. Better put the plug in, otherwise you're all going to be cut off. All right. Plug fell out. But Reb Chaim Volozhin in the Nefesh HaChaim says mitzvahs is also from the lashon of tzafsa. Tzafsa is companionship, right? It says oy chavrusa oy misusa. That's tzafsa. That's companionship. And he says mitzvahs is because it gives us a tzafsa with Hashem. When we do mitzvahs, it brings us close to Hashem. We're keeping Shabbos, we're getting close to Hashem. We're wearing tzitzis, we're getting close to Hashem. We're doing chesed. And by the way, that David HaMelech says closeness to Hashem is good. V'ani kirvas elikim li toiv. Now I want to share with you here something from Rabbi Dr. Tursky. Can't believe that he's not with us. Zeich Tzadik, Levracha, Schutza Yogan Aleinu. A lot of times, he explained Torah through the lens of his therapy. He worked a lot with addictions, and he believed very much in the programs of Alcohol Anonymous. And one of their great principles, which by the way was introduced in 1930, one of their great principles was that for a drunk to accept that he's never going to drink again is too overwhelming. You have to realize, to a drunk, his exclusive joy in life is to drink. And that he should never drink, that's just too overwhelming. So he said the idea of Alcohol Anonymous, and by the way, this works with gambling and it works with overeating, is to take one day at a time. One day he could do. Don't think about tomorrow. He actually writes that he had a friend who he treated, and he passed away at 83. He was sober for 46 years. And the day before he died, they saw him, it was written, this is day number 16,472 that I'm sober. He took one day at a time. So Rabbi Twersky said, while Alcohol Anonymous, you see, this is what you do when you're a big Talmid Chacham. So while Alcohol Anonymous introduced this in 1930, he said 150 years ago, the Chassam Sofer introduced this from this pasuk. He said, for a person to say, I'm going to deal with this Yetzer Hara for the rest of my life is too overwhelming. He says, deal with it today. V'atem adveikim b'Hashem Elokeichem chayim kulchem hayoy. You're alive today. Except today. Tomorrow, we'll try. But take one day at a time. Really, really amazing. The Chassam Sofer introduced this way before Alcohol Anonymous. I want to conclude. I can't believe it. It's already an hour and 2 minutes. I told you that this shiur really does not do justice to this parsha. I mean, the Aseres HaDibros, the world-famous prayer, 515 prayers of Moshe Rabbeinu. Please make sure to check back in for the Shabbos table for Vaeschanan, where we're going to talk more about this parsha. We also do not have a sponsor for next week's shiur. So anybody out there in the wild blue yonder who wants to sponsor next week, 718-916-3100. You could text me, or rmmwsi@aol.com. We thank Dr. Block for sponsoring this week. Lila Nishmas, his father, Aaron Ben Eliezer. I want to end. We all know, it says, it talks about the mitzvah of tefillin in this week's parsha. And we know that we learn from this pasuk what we do, that we put the tefillin shel yad on first, and then the tefillin shel rosh, the tefillin of the hand, and then the tefillin. It's based on the pasuk. We put it on the hand first, because at first it says, and then, but when we take it off, we take off the tefillin shel yad first, taking it off with our left hand to show that it's hard. We take off the tefillin shel rosh first, and then, only then do we take off the tefillin shel yad, and that's also based on the pasuk, because it says, V'hayu l'toitafis beinecha, and V'hayu is a lashon rabim. V'hayu is plural. That when it's l'toitafis beinecha, when it's on your head, it has to be plural. So therefore, you can't have it on the head without having it on the hand, because then it won't be plural. So you got to take the head off first, and then the hand. The Tiferes Shmuel on the Rush adds another reason, which I found fascinating. We know that on the tefillin shorais, on the tefillin is a shin, and in the knot there's a dalet. Some people have a square, but that contains a dalet. And on the hand is a yud. Tzfei Shmuel says that if you would put the shorais on alone, that would be shade, a demon. You don't do that. Therefore, you put the shel yad first, which has the yud, and then when you put the shin dal, then it becomes Shaddai, Hashem's name. And therefore, you take off the tefillin shorais first, that it should never be without the yud. You should always have the shem shakai. It reminds me of the minig of Munkach. It's everybody's minig, but it's a word from the Munkacher Rebbe that people have, that after the fish, they drink brumfen, they drink whiskey to separate from the whiskey, from the fish to everything else. So the Munkacher Rebbe says that whiskey is yayin sraf. That's yud sin. And dogim is dalet. So that makes the shem shakai. The yud, the shin, and the dalet make the shem shakai. That's a word from the Munkacher Rav. We want to thank you all for joining us. Wish you a good night and a good Shabbos.